kickoff session for the 2015-2016 academic year for Common Sense, which is Georgetown's premier financial literacy program here on campus. It's run by students and for students. So we have 5 fantastic financial literacy interns who have put together this event. And we're glad that you were able to attend. So thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to do so. All right, so we are humbled and honored to have our first speaker for this kickoff session. The man I'm speaking of is Dean Thomas, who came to us in August of 2011, who's the Dean of the McDonough School of Business. He spent 2 decades at Harvard, and has co-published 2 books, written over 60 case studies and articles in journals, and I think impressively as well, has changed the campaign goal from $100 million for the School of Business to $125 million for the School of Business, and already has reached $110 million so far. So this type of transformative leadership is why we asked him to speak, so we are so glad he was able to take time out of his busy schedule to do so. Thank you so much. So without further ado, I would like to welcome all of you, and please join me in introducing Dean David A. Thomas.
Good. How's everybody doing? Good. Okay. Well, it's great to have the opportunity to talk to you. I had to make some notes because, I said, they asked me if I would speak. I said yes. I looked at what they wanted me to actually speak about just last week, and it's budgeting. They probably thought, guy who runs a $100 million organization, who's been teaching at business schools now for almost 30 years, probably knows something about budgeting. And I thought about it from the vantage point of, I do. I run a $100 million operation. I've been at a business school for teaching at business school for almost 30 years. Then I thought to myself, well, actually I have a CFO who takes care of my budget. And I'm actually an organizational sociologist, not an accountant or a finance person. So what do I know about budgets? And then I thought about, is there any way that I can actually be relevant to a conversation here with you guys? I thought to myself, I'm not the accountant, I'm not the CFO, but I do have to interact around budgets. Even more important, I've had to manage my own budget, my own life. And that brought me to one realization, which is much of what I know about budgets, I learned before I even graduated from high school. And much of it translates today into the way I think about managing the budget here at the business school and managing the finances in my own life. So what I thought I would do is first tell you a little bit about how my attitude and orientation toward budgets evolved. And this is in line with, this idea that much of what we think about money was formed early in our lives. And one thing I'll suggest that you do is think about what the messages and habits are that you have developed and observed about money. Because I also know that when I look at people who continually have problems managing their budget, a lot of it comes back to habits and attitudes about managing money that started long ago. And if you don't understand that, it's hard to interrupt. So, first let me give you a little background about me. Tomorrow's my birthday. Thank you. I'll be 59 years old. I was born in Kansas City, Missouri, born and raised. Kansas City, Missouri, from a working class family, or in a working class family, two great parents, neither one of whom graduated from high school, no less went to college, but they were great parents. My father worked as a welder, and my mother worked as a seamstress. Today, people would look at what she did and say that she worked in a sweatshop, working at piece rate, where you got like a nickel for every sleeve you sewed on. Right? So I was first generation college. And grew up in a family that really had to think about the fact that money was tight, kind of a paycheck to paycheck. Right? But as I said, they were great parents, and they taught me probably about 3 lessons about money that serve me today. The first lesson is they taught me the relationship between revenues, right, the money that you have coming in, expenses, the money you have going out, profit, the money left over after expenses, right, and debt. And the way they reinforce it in different ways, but the one that stands out most to me is when I was 10, I got a paper route. Right? I delivered a weekly newspaper in Kansas City. I remember my father set it up, and he said, "Okay, now you sell the paper for 25 cents. The paper will cost you 15 cents, and you have 10 cents left over." Right? And you have to realize that, each week you have to buy a new supply of papers. Right? So, that's the way you have to think about this. Well, I go out first week. Maybe I think I had the wrong idea. The paper cost me 10 cents, and you could make 15 cent profit. Right? So anyway, go out, first week, and I have the revenues. Revenues come in. And I go and I spend all the revenues. Right? I go to the candy store, I'm treating all my friends, spending all the revenues. And my father's watching this, and the next week, he says, "Well, time to buy the papers." I said, "Okay." We go, he looks at me and he says, "Well, where's the money?" I said, "I don't have it." Because I had the revenues. I spent them. He says, "Well, you got this is going to cost you." I said, "So what do you do?" He says, "I'm going to loan you the money." Right? So now I go, get the revenues. I now plan on paying for next week's supply of papers. Right? But I still have some profit left. And my father takes the profit. I said, "What's going on?" He said, "That's called debt. I loaned you the money, now you have to pay me back. So every week until it's all paid up, I get the profit." I'm a little kid. I think I remember almost crying. Right? That, I've got it. And so, sort of lesson number 1 is you have to understand the relationship between money coming in, revenues, expenses, profit, and debt. Now, this also shaped some attitudes that I had. One of which is I hate debt. To this day, I hate debt. Even if you watch decisions I've made about what house to buy, right? I hate debt. Also, this idea that you have to prioritize your expenses. One way to think about the fact that I had to each week save the money so I could go buy the papers was that was the equivalent of, my rent. There are certain expenses that if you can't pay those, you're essentially out of business or you're out of the house. Second lesson that I think is relevant in terms of thinking about budgeting is that budgeting is about setting goals, planning, and applying discipline. Setting goals, planning, and applying discipline. And the first place I learned that was in my parents' attitudes toward buying things that in their view were extras. Right? They weren't necessities. So they supplied all the necessities. And I remember my first lesson of this was, there's these shoes that people are wearing now as kind of style, and kind of style things, Chucks. The Converse shoes, right? Well, back in my day, people actually played sports in those shoes. And there were also cheap versions of shoes, so I wanted some Chucks, some Chuck Taylor All-Star type shoes. And my parents said to me, okay, tell you what we'll do. We'll pay for half. Which meant that I had to plan to save up to get my half. Which meant now when I was thinking about my stream of income, which by this point in time, I had expanded my entrepreneurial empire. I was selling papers, cutting grass, and washing windows. It's probably about 12 or 13. I had to think about, okay, here's a goal I've set. And now I've got to plan my budget so that I can meet that goal. And also think about it in terms of time horizon. By when did I want to do it? Because that would influence how much of my profits I would set aside to achieve that goal versus have in my pocket to spend and entertain myself and my friends. So planning is about setting goals, budgeting is about setting goals, planning, and you have to apply discipline. You have to apply discipline because, like I said, my parents were great parents, and the first couple of times we made a deal like this, I thought they would backstop me. I'd get kind of a quarter of the way toward my goal, but I really needed, the Chucks like right away because basketball season was starting, and I thought that they would, just pitch in and pay the rest. They never did. So that's where I learned about this. And they applied that to almost everything going forward. They did it when I wanted to buy a car. Okay, we'll do half. You do half. And it's a lesson that planning, setting goals, planning, and applying discipline works for me today as dean of the school. Because we've set some pretty aggressive goals for how we want to advance the McDonough School of Business. But to get there, we have to generate the funds, we have to figure out what we can do today, what we need to set aside so that we can reach those goals in the out years. Same thing applies. And the last lesson is about monitoring your spending. And how many of you have checking accounts? How many of you had checking accounts before you were 16 years old? Okay. So when I was about 14, my mother took me to the bank and got me a checking account. Before then, I was sort of keeping my money, in my cookie jars and whatever. And one of the things I learned, that she told me this notion of balancing your checkbook, right? And doing it, in a continuous way. Like you write a check, you then figure out how much you have left, and you use that to monitor whether or not you're on track to reaching your goals. Because you can easily fall off. again, that's a lesson that we apply right here as, at the MSB. We do quarterly examinations of where we are on our spending, our budgeting model. And at the personal level, today there is a great scourge on us that often allows us or leads us to lose that discipline that didn't exist in my day. It's called the ATM card. You're out, having fun, coming up a little short on cash, a little short on the cash in the pocket. We go to the ATM, and I don't know very many people, at least I know I don't, my kids don't. When we take the money out of the ATM, we usually don't look at the receipt to see what our balance is and think about what we've done. Right? So remember the ATM, one thing I advise you is if you're going out to a party or something, take the money you're going to spend that night out of the ATM before you're actually at the party, and when you're out of money, say you're done. Don't go back to the ATM. Matter of fact, leave the card at home. Leave the card at home. Okay? So, one thing that I would ask each of you to do as an exercise, so those are kind of 3 lessons that I learned. One thing I'd ask each of you to do as an exercise is just put to yourself 3 questions. What messages did I get about money growing up? What messages did I get about money growing up? And we all got some. What habits have I already developed about money? What habits have I already developed about money? And what habits and attitudes did I observe in adults around me? Because sometimes we're not aware that we have somehow, sort of drawn into ourselves those very same habits. And oftentimes when I think about friends of mine, relatives of mine, who have problems managing their budgets, they're people who I've known for a long time, those problems go way back. Right? Like I've got one of my brothers who didn't take in those lessons that I took in from my parents. To this day, he's always calling me up asking me to borrow money. Right? Doesn't pay me back. He was that way for 50 years ago. Habits that we've learned, because they will influence your success applying any tips about managing budgets. But you can also interrupt those habits and attitudes if you are aware of them. So I'm just going to end and then open up for questions with just a few tips on managing your budget. I think they're consistent with what I've said, and they also added it to them. First one is you need to pick a time frame for your budget. Monthly, semester, yearly. As students, I would suggest that you think about it in terms of from 2 time dimensions. Monthly and semester. Monthly and semester. Shorter term kind of focus rather than the year-long budget notion. Second, for that time frame, list all of your income, whether it's coming from work study, financial aid, money your parents are likely to send you, wherever it's coming from, list all of your income and list all of your expenses. Now, the other thing I would say about expenses is prioritize your expenses. Prioritize your expenses so that when times get tight, you know what you must pay and what you can do without. So, rent for most of us is a must-have. One of the things I've learned in my own life is that things that I love them and their habits aren't necessarily priorities. They're not must-haves. I'll give you a good example. When I was in college, money was tight. I loved having a car. Made me cool. Gave me lots of flexibility to go where I wanted to go. But I realized that it actually wasn't a priority. So I got rid of my car and didn't buy another car for 10 years till I was out of graduate school. Right? Now, sometimes I felt like I was the only person in America walking. But that was a clear choice so that I could, achieve some of those things that were in my goals. But if I hadn't had that discipline about budgeting, I would have treated the car the same way I treated my rent. So sort of asking yourself, right, what are the priority expenditures, and let me pay those first, including setting aside money for emergencies or a rainy day fund. And what I suggest you do there is set aside a minimum of 10%. After you pay your priority expenses, then pay yourself first. That's what that emergency fund is. That's there for you on rainy days. Pay yourself first. What's left, if there's anything left, that's your discretionary money to do with what you want, right? Or what makes you happy, I would say. And when you leave Georgetown and get your first job, keep that practice up about the rainy day fund, because that also becomes your go-to-hell money. What I mean by go-to-hell money? If you develop that habit, you'll never find yourself in a job where you're saying to yourself, I got to stay here because of the money. Right? I don't know. I won't know if I walked out of the, I'm so paycheck to paycheck that if I walked out of here today, I couldn't keep myself afloat for 2 months while I find a job. And it gives you a kind of confidence, right? Because I got my go-to-hell money. That you will take risks that you wouldn't otherwise take. And you, because you're here at Georgetown, we know, will find yourself in high-risk, high-reward opportunity environments. Right? It's having that go-to-hell money that will allow you to one day turn around and say, you know what I really want to do? I want to start my own company. And you look up, and if for your first 10 years out, you've been kind of creating that go-to-hell fund, right? Or that go-to-heaven fund. Because now I've got that opportunity that if I can just step off the treadmill, this is what will take me to where I really want to be. Right? And then what's left is for discretionary spending. Practice it. Start it now. Practice it going forward. I guarantee you it will pay. Guarantee you it will pay. I've made decisions at various points in my life to step away from what were, in the short term, higher paying opportunities to go do something that I really thought was about what I'm here to do on this earth. And in every instance, I turned out to be richer, both in terms of financial capital, but also in terms of social capital. Right? Meaning the people that I became connected to, and human capital, meaning how I enhanced myself. And I see so many people who are risk averse in that regard, and often it comes back to ways in which they feel materially chained to what they're doing. So, practice that. Plan and save for big ticket items. plan and save for big ticket items. And in my view, take on debt to get a big ticket item with lots of caution. Take on debt for big ticket items with lots of caution. I think you're always better, the closer you are to being able to pay for the whole thing, the better you'll be in the long term, because it just keeps you in that mindset of not being chained to it. And finally, make sure your budget balances. Revenues, expenses, back to that balancing your checkbook, keeping up with it, applying discipline. So that's what I thought I would share with you about budgeting, and then we'll open it up for any questions you have. Naluka is here with a microphone, and you can talk about anything you want.